I invited him into my home, never expecting what would unfold in the next few minutes. It wasn't just an ordinary day. It was a day that would challenge my perception of myself and of the world around me. You see, I am a woman of simple tastes. My life is quiet, centered around the small comforts of home, routine, and solitude. I am used to the serenity that comes from my daily tasks, the cleaning, organizing, and little rituals that keep everything in balance. But on this particular morning, something happened that would shift my entire perspective. I feel the need to share what happened with you, though I must warn you that it may sound unusual, and you might even judge me. But I am only human, susceptible to emotions, to moments of weakness, and to the unexpected. So please, listen with an open mind as I tell you this story. It was a warm, sun-drenched morning, and like every other, I was at home attending to my household chores. The house was empty, my husband at work, my children at school, and I relished these moments of quiet. The calm solitude allowed me to lose myself in the rhythm of music while I worked. I always turned up the volume, dancing around as I tidied up, almost as if the music itself was a form of therapy, sweeping away the stresses of daily life along with the dust and clutter. That day, the music filled every corner of the house. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow across the floor as I moved furniture and scrubbed surfaces. I was completely immersed in my routine, so much so that I didn't even hear the doorbell ring. I was too lost in the melody, moving around in a kind of trance, unaware that someone had come to the door. What I didn't know at the time was that a friend of my husband's, Pedro, had stopped by to return the lawnmower he had borrowed a few days earlier. He had tried calling, but when there was no answer, he decided to come by in person. After ringing the doorbell several times without receiving a response, Pedro, thinking I was probably preoccupied, decided to leave the lawnmower in the backyard. As he passed the window of the dining room, he saw me, dancing and cleaning, completely oblivious to his presence. What happened next still surprises me. Pedro stood there, frozen, watching me for a long time. It was as if he were mesmerized by the sight of me, so typically reserved and modest, moving freely and confidently to the music, completely unself-conscious and lost in the moment. The contrast was striking. For those few moments, I was not the woman he knew, the one who kept to herself and followed the rules of decorum. I was something else entirely. It wasn't until I caught a glimpse of him through the window that I was jolted back into reality. My heart raced as I realized I was not alone. A wave of adrenaline hit me, and my instinct was to cover myself, to somehow shield my vulnerability. Even though I was dressed casually, in comfortable clothes for cleaning, at that moment, I felt exposed, as if he had seen something personal, something that wasn't meant to be shared. My thoughts raced, and I quickly ran to grab a nightgown, trying to hide the unsettling feeling that had come over me. Still shaken, I made my way to the backyard, where Pedro stood beside the lawnmower. I approached him, trying to act as though nothing had happened, my voice betraying a trace of unease. "Pedro, what were you doing at the window?" I asked, attempting to keep my tone light, though I could feel the tension in my chest. His response came slowly, as though he too was trying to process what had just occurred. But deep down, I knew that the moment had already changed something between us. I wasn't just the quiet housewife anymore. I had been seen, in a way that was both revealing and unsettling. Pedro shifted awkwardly, a small, uncertain smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he explained his unexpected visit. He had come to return the lawnmower, and when he hadn't received a response after several attempts to reach me, he had decided to leave it in the yard. He mentioned that when he saw movement through the window, his curiosity got the best of him, and he briefly wondered if an intruder had entered the house. With that thought, he had stayed by the window to ensure everything was okay. His explanation seemed reasonable, even logical, but there was something in the way his eyes lingered on me that sent a wave of discomfort rippling through my chest. Trying to ease the tension, I half joked, "You looked like a burglar spying on me through the window." He laughed at that, but there was an edge of nervousness in his tone, as if he was trying to mask the tension of the moment with humor. He shifted uneasily, then suggested we cool off with a drink, given how stifling the morning heat had become. I agreed, though I wasn't entirely sure what to make of the situation, and invited him inside. Once we were in the house, I offered him a glass of orange juice, which he accepted gratefully. He sat down on the couch, the same strange smile still playing on his lips. As he sipped the juice, he commented on how different I seemed in that moment, how relaxed, how carefree. He admitted it was a stark contrast to the quiet, composed woman he had always known, the one who appeared so distant, almost unreachable. His words took me by surprise. I wasn't used to receiving compliments, especially from someone who was so close to my husband. For a fleeting moment, I felt a strange warmth inside, a little flutter of pride at being seen in a way that was entirely unexpected. Pedro seemed hesitant, as if he feared his words might be misinterpreted. Yet, there was something in his eyes, a spark of something unspoken, a glint that suggested he was holding back, unsure how to express what he was really feeling. He pressed on, insisting that there was something about that morning, something in the way I moved, that had captivated him in a way he couldn't fully explain. His words sent a shiver through me, a mix of confusion and something else, something far more dangerous. I tried to brush it off, laughing lightly and downplaying the situation. "It's just a normal day for me, nothing special," I said, hoping to deflect the growing tension. But Pedro wasn't convinced. He seemed determined to convey that what he saw was not just ordinary. It was something that had left an impression on him, something he couldn't shake. The conversation shifted, and I could feel the invisible line between us thinning, becoming more fragile with each word. Part of me screamed to stop, to pull back and restore the boundaries of our relationship. But there was a part of me that couldn't help but be drawn in, a flicker of curiosity and longing that I couldn't quite understand. When Pedro finally decided to leave, I noticed he seemed visibly agitated. There was a strange tension in the air, thick and suffocating, and I couldn't help but feel its weight. I had never felt so observed, so desired. It was a sensation I couldn't quite place, a mix of discomfort and excitement that stirred something deep within me. And then, in an instant, everything shifted. Pedro reached out to me, his eyes searching mine, and before I could react or pull away, his lips met mine in an unexpected kiss. For a moment, I was frozen, completely caught off guard, my body betraying me as I let myself get lost in the heat of the moment. It was a kiss that lingered, and for that brief, breathless second, everything else in the world disappeared. But then, just as quickly as it began, a wave of guilt crashed over me. What had I done? How could I have allowed this to happen? The rational part of me screamed to step back, to make things right. But there was another part, an unfamiliar, darker part, that seemed to revel in the newness of the emotion, the tension, the desire, the forbidden nature of it all. Pedro, equally as shaken as I was, pulled away and immediately began apologizing, his voice trembling with regret. He took my hand, his eyes full of confusion and remorse, but I remained silent, unsure how to respond. I simply watched him, still processing what had just transpired. In that moment, everything felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't quite wake up from. Trying to regain some semblance of control, I reached for a childhood bracelet that sat on a nearby shelf, offering it to him as a gesture of peace, a way to calm the storm of emotions between us. He took it, his fingers brushing mine, and for a fleeting moment, the tension between us seemed to ease. He smiled, a small, tentative smile, and for a moment, the air felt less heavy. We sat there, on the couch, side by side, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the world outside had ceased to exist. In that fleeting instance, I felt more alive than I had in years. There was a strange, almost mystical quality to it, as though we were no longer simply two people sitting together, but something more. It was as if we were both exploring an entirely new world, a world that had always been there but one I had never dared to enter before. And as the time passed, I realized that I was more drawn into this connection than I had ever expected to be. I knew I was treading dangerous waters. This newfound intimacy, this bond that seemed to be growing between us, frightened me. Yet, it also fascinated me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. When Pedro finally stood up to leave, I felt a mixture of regret and yearning. The part of me that had been awakened, the part I didn't even know existed, longed for more. What had I done? How could I have allowed myself to be swept up in such a reckless moment? I glanced around, desperately seeking comfort in the chaos of the house, the familiar disarray of toys and clutter. But even the mess seemed different now. It was as if everything around me had changed, and I was seeing it all through a new lens. The guilt gnawed at me, but there was something else. An unexpected spark of excitement. A strange, unsettling sensation that buzzed beneath the surface. The contrast between the two feelings, guilt and excitement, made my heart race, and I couldn't help but wonder, was this how the beginning of something new felt? My mind raced, trying to justify what had happened. I told myself it was a moment of weakness, just a fleeting lapse in judgment. The music, the heat of the moment, the loneliness. But deep down, I knew I was only trying to convince myself. What had passed between Pedro and me wasn't just some random encounter or an isolated slip-up. No, there was something deeper at play. Something that had been building quietly beneath the surface, creeping up on me without my realizing, until now it was undeniable, and I was face to face with it. For a split second, I entertained the thought of confessing everything to my husband. The urge to come clean clawed at me, but the very idea of it made my stomach twist with dread. How could I possibly explain the inexplicable? How could I tell him that, in one reckless moment, I had surrendered to emotions I hadn't even known existed? The thought of destroying the trust between us, of watching the fragile bond we had built shatter, filled me with terror, and yet, the fear of facing the consequences of my actions seemed like the lesser evil. So, I did nothing. In the days that followed, I tried to slip back into the familiar routine of my life. I cleaned the house, cared for the kids, shared smiles with my husband as though nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, everything felt different. There was a raw, open wound within me, and every time I thought of that kiss, of the intimacy I had shared with Pedro, it throbbed, reminding me of what I had lost, or perhaps what I had gained. I avoided Pedro whenever he came by to see my husband. I found excuses to leave the room, to retreat to some corner where I wouldn't have to face him. I couldn't deal with the weight of the unspoken between us, the tension that lingered like an invisible thread connecting us. It was as if we both understood that what had happened between us couldn't be dismissed, no matter how hard we tried to pretend it was just an accident, a mistake. And yet, despite the silence, there was a connection between us that neither of us could deny. As time wore on, I couldn't shake the nagging thought. Had that moment with Pedro awakened something inside me that my marriage hadn't been able to stir in a long time? I loved my husband, of course. There was no question about that. But our life together had become so predictable, so mundane. Everything felt mechanical, as though we were simply going through the motions. And then Pedro came along, with his easy smile and carefree attitude, and in one fleeting moment, he had filled a space I didn't even know was empty. The guilt was overwhelming, yet the desire to understand what had happened, to explore this new emotional territory, was almost irresistible. I knew I couldn't allow what had happened to continue. To do so would be to betray my husband, my family, everything I had built with them. But the thought of returning to the dull routine of my previous life was terrifying. Could I reconcile both worlds, be responsible and true to my commitments, yet still allow space for this new emotional awakening? One evening, as we sat down to dinner, my husband casually mentioned Pedro. He laughed as he shared how Pedro had said he'd enjoyed his visit earlier, how he seemed happier than usual. My heart skipped a beat. Just the mention of Pedro's name sent a wave of heat through my body, stirring up all those emotions I had tried so hard to bury. I tried to play it off, laughing along, but inside I felt like I was about to explode. The very mention of him had the power to unravel me. After that dinner, I made a decision. I had to understand what was happening inside me. I needed clarity. Was Pedro just a fleeting distraction? A physical attraction that would fade with time? Or was there something more? Something I didn't want to admit to myself. A few days later, I summoned the courage to seek him out. I knew it was risky, that I was walking a fine line between curiosity and danger. But something inside me demanded answers. I needed to know the truth. I found him at the coffee shop where he often spent his weekends. His face lit up when he saw me, his surprise quickly melting into that familiar, disarming smile. We found a quiet corner, away from prying eyes, and for a moment, we just sat there, both unsure how to begin. "I know it was unexpected," he said, his voice hesitant as though weighing each word carefully, "and I don't want you to think that I was trying to... that wasn't my intention." Before he could finish, I interrupted him, my heart pounding in my chest. "No, Ro," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "I'm not here to blame you. I'm here because I need to understand what that moment meant, not just for you, but for me too." The words felt heavy in the air between us, like the weight of a secret shared too openly. He fell silent, his eyes fixed on the ground as though he were searching for the right way to explain himself. After a few moments, he looked up at me, his expression thoughtful, almost distant. "To be honest," he began, his voice low, "I'm not sure what to say. It wasn't planned. It was just a moment, an impulse, something that happened in the heat of everything. But I can't deny it. Since that day, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." His words hit me like a tidal wave, and for a second, it felt like I was drowning in the raw honesty of his confession. There was something more there, something deeper than mere attraction, something that went beyond the surface. I had known it then, and I knew it now. Pedro was telling me the truth, and for some reason, that made everything more complicated. "I've been thinking about it a lot, too," I confessed, my voice trembling just slightly. "But we can't go on like this, Pedro. I have a family, a husband. I can't just throw all of that away, not for something that feels like it came out of nowhere." Pedro nodded slowly, his face etched with understanding. "I know," he said, his tone calm but tinged with regret. "And I respect that. I never wanted to come between you and your family. But I can't ignore what I feel either. It's not something I can just push aside." For a moment, the weight of reality hung heavily in the space between us. There was something undeniably real between us, something we couldn't easily dismiss. But we both understood the consequences. If we were to pursue this, it would tear apart the lives we'd worked so hard to build. It wasn't just about us anymore. There were other people to consider. We sat there in silence, the air thick with unspoken emotions, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to make sense of the situation. What could we do? What was the right choice? How could we move forward without destroying everything we held dear? After what felt like an eternity, I spoke again, my voice steadier now. "As difficult as this is," I said, my words laced with sorrow, "I think the only choice we have is to walk away. There's no other way forward without causing too much pain. I need to focus on my family, on my marriage. And you need to focus on your life, too." Pedro looked at me, his eyes searching mine as though trying to find any trace of doubt, any hint that I might change my mind. But I was resolute. The truth was there, and we both knew it. It was time to let it go. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "We can't let this destroy what we have, what we've built. We have to let it go." That was it. The decision was made, and yet, in some strange way, there was a sense of peace between us. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was an understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to walk away from something beautiful because you know that its consequences will be too great to bear. As I returned to my daily life, I tried to bury the memories of that day with Pedro deep within me, like a secret tucked away in a forgotten drawer. Little by little, I fell back into my routine, caring for my family, tending to my marriage, trying to remember what had once united me and my husband. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase the memory of that morning with Pedro. That morning had marked me. The way he looked at me, the way he made me feel, alive, wanted, cherished, would remain with me forever. A part of me would always remember Pedro, not just for what we shared in that fleeting moment, but for the depth of emotion that had surged between us. It was a part of me that I could never fully forget. But now, more than ever, I understood that some feelings, no matter how intense, need to be left behind. Some things are better left in the past, where they cannot harm the present. My marriage continued, and I worked harder than ever to rediscover the bond with my husband, to focus on what had once brought us together, what had made us partners in this life. Yet that sunny morning with Pedro would remain, forever etched in a secret corner of my heart, a bittersweet memory that would never fade, no matter how much time passed.